The sun had barely dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow across the suburban neighborhood, the kind of warmth that should have brought peace. But inside the brightly lit home, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Avery Hayes stood frozen, eyes fixed on the scene unfolding before them. Their heart raced, not with fear, but with the kind of restrained fury that came from years of training in the courtroom. Brittany Adams, the woman standing before them, had always been a problem in the neighborhood. From the very first day Avery moved in, Brittany had made it her mission to impose herself, her authority, her rules. But today, something snapped inside Avery. Brittany was standing over their crying child, her hands gripping the baby's leg with a strength that was both shocking and cruel. "Let go of her." Avery's voice was calm, unnervingly so, considering the fury that twisted their insides. But the calmness was deliberate. Avery knew better than anyone that in moments like this, emotion could cloud judgment. They had seen it too many times in courtrooms, where an impassioned reaction could ruin a case. This wasn't a case, though. This was something much more personal. Brittany didn't flinch, her face contorted with anger, her eyes wide with the kind of entitlement only people like her could carry. "She's nothing but a nuisance, Avery. She's disturbing the peace. You need to control your child," she spat, her words laced with venom. Avery's mind swirled with disbelief. Disturbing the peace? The words didn't match the scene. Their daughter, barely 2, was sobbing uncontrollably, her tiny hands flailing helplessly as Brittany's grip on her leg remained unyielding. The baby's screams filled the air, each cry twisting deeper into Avery's chest, a visceral reaction that had nothing to do with legal expertise or calm deliberation. This wasn't a case to be argued in court, this was personal. Avery stepped forward, their hands trembling ever so slightly. Not out of fear, but from the immense effort it took to maintain control. They had been in far worse situations, in far more dangerous rooms. They had faced criminals, masterminds, people who made their careers by breaking the law. But this was different. It was the rawest form of violation. A mother's instinctive need to protect her child, and the call to stop someone who had crossed a line that Avery could not ignore. This isn't just about the baby, Avery thought, the words racing through their mind like a judgment they were ready to deliver. It's about respect, about control. Karen had overstepped her bounds, taken matters into her own hands in the most unspeakable way. And Avery wouldn't stand for it, not in their neighborhood, not with their family. Avery took a deep breath, their voice low but unwavering. "Let go of her, Brittany," they commanded again, stepping closer. Every muscle in their body screamed to act, physically, violently, if necessary. But they didn't. Not yet. Brittany looked down at them, her grip tightening. "What's your problem, Avery? You think you can intimidate me with that calm facade of yours?" She laughed, the sound filled with scorn. "You may have been a judge, but I don't care about that. You're nothing here." The mention of their past stung, a reminder of the life Avery had left behind. For a brief moment, the old fire from their courtroom days flickered within. It was there, the ability to command a room, the unwavering certainty of their position. But Avery held it back, remembering why they had left that life. No, this was not about that. It was about their daughter, about what kind of world they were raising her in. Avery was no longer a judge, but the weight of their former life carried something far greater than the law. Inner strength, a determination that was about to test the limits of everything Brittany thought she knew. Without another word, Avery moved swiftly, gripping Brittany's wrist with the precision of a judge delivering a final verdict. Brittany tried to pull away, but it was too late. Avery's calm demeanor shifted into something more dangerous, a silent promise that no one, especially not Brittany, would get away with this. "Let go of her." Now, Avery said, their voice a controlled storm, the kind that carried the weight of their past and present in a single measured sentence. The force of Avery's presence was undeniable. Brittany's grip faltered for just a second, and that was all Avery needed. Avery stood at the center of the courtroom. The hum of whispered conversations and shuffling papers faded into the background. It was Always like this before a verdict, the suffocating tension thick in the air, heavy with expectation. The defendant, a man whose life had been torn apart by his own actions, was standing before Avery, nervously awaiting judgment. But Avery, whose gaze was as sharp as the gavel they wielded, showed no sign of hesitation. Their calm, unwavering demeanor was their greatest weapon. In this room, Avery was not just a judge, they were the embodiment of justice itself. The weight of their decision wasn't lost on them. They had been in this position too many times, too many lives in the balance, but it was never just about the law. It was about the lives they affected. The courtroom was quiet, almost too quiet, as Avery spoke. The law must be applied without mercy, without bias. But justice is not blind to the soul of the one standing before it. Their words, delivered with clarity and purpose, echoed across the room, as if reverberating through the very walls that had witnessed countless such trials. A decision had to be made, and Avery made it decisively. As they handed down the sentence, Avery's hand shook only slightly, a subtle indication of the burden they carried. But the room took notice. To the public, Avery was the embodiment of calm and control. To those who knew the real story, they were more than just a judge, they were a symbol of unshakable strength, unflinching and resolute in the face of moral ambiguity. But even as Avery delivered that final sentence, a quiet voice inside them whispered, "I thought the law would give me peace, but it's the one thing that haunts me now." The room cleared, and the press of the world outside flooded back in. No moment to reflect, no space to breathe. Life moved on, but Avery did not. They felt the familiar ache in their chest, the constant pull between duty and the weight of moral compromise. Every day spent in the courtroom had been a struggle to maintain a sense of purpose, but the personal cost of being so entwined with the law had finally broken them. As the memory began to fade, Avery's eyes fluttered open. The courtroom was gone, replaced by the harsh, unrelenting brightness of the present. They were no longer in that role, no longer living the life of a judge, but the lessons learned, those decisions, the lives they touched, still lingered, haunting them in ways they could never escape. I left it all behind, but did I really leave it? Avery thought, now standing in the kitchen with their daughter in their arms, the distant memory of the gavel still echoing in their bones. This wasn't the courtroom. This wasn't justice. This was real life, and Avery was determined to protect the people they loved in a way they couldn't in the courtroom. The atmosphere inside Avery's house had gone from tense to suffocating. The sound of their daughter's sobs echoed through the hallway, a constant reminder of the boundary that had been crossed. Brittany, Karen, as Avery had come to call her, was standing just a few feet away, her hands now planted firmly on her hips, face flushed with the heat of a confrontation that had been building for weeks. Avery, still holding their daughter in their arms, could feel every muscle in their body coiled in restraint. They were fighting the urge to let their old instincts, those that had made them such a force in the courtroom, take over. They knew how to control a room, how to make people listen. But this wasn't a courtroom. This wasn't a case to be decided by law and logic. This was personal. Brittany's eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a smirk of absolute arrogance. "You know, Avery," she began, her voice dripping with venom, "you've been walking around here like you own the place. But the truth is, I do." She stepped forward, uninvited, crossing the threshold of Avery's personal space without a second thought. She wasn't just challenging Avery's authority, she was challenging their very right to exist in the neighborhood. "I've been here longer than you, and I know how things are run around here. You think you can just waltz in and make the rules?" Avery clenched their teeth. They could feel the tension rising like a storm in their chest. They weren't going to let Brittany's words get to them, not this time. But even as the thought crossed their mind, a flood of memories from their time on the bench surged forward. Memories of holding court, of giving orders that had to be obeyed. Their fingers twitched slightly, as though reaching for the gavel they hadn't touched in years. Brittany wasn't done. She took another step forward, closer now, her presence almost suffocating. "You think you're above me? You think because you were a judge once, you can just tell everyone what to do? Well, guess what? You're not a judge anymore. You're just another parent in the neighborhood, and I'm not going to let you push me around. Avery's grip on their daughter tightened instinctively as Brittany reached out and flicked the baby's leg hard. The cry that followed was gut-wrenching. The air grew still, thick with the sound of the baby's shrill wails. It was that sound, the sound of their child's pain, that shattered the calm veneer Avery had been desperately clinging to. In an instant, their old instincts kicked in, and their stance shifted. Avery's voice cut through the tension like a knife, low and deliberate. "Don't touch my child." But Brittany wasn't done. Not by a long shot. She raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms defiantly. "What are you going to do, Avery? You can't intimidate me anymore. I know exactly who you are. You think your lawyering tricks still work on people like me? Not today." Brittany's arrogance was infuriating, but it wasn't the first time Avery had faced someone who thought they could challenge authority. They had seen this attitude in the courtroom before. People who thought the rules didn't apply to them, who thought they could bend the system to their will. And yet, it wasn't enough for Brittany. No, she was looking for something deeper, a way to make Avery feel powerless. But Avery wasn't powerless. Not now. Not in this moment. Avery took a steadying breath. The old Avery, the judge, would have risen to the challenge with authority, would have commanded Brittany to back down with the force of the law. But the new Avery, the one who had stepped away from that life, wasn't interested in a battle of egos. What they wanted was something simpler, something far more primal. They wanted their daughter safe. They wanted peace. Avery's eyes locked onto Brittany's, unwavering. "You're in my way now, Brittany. And I don't care who you think you are. You're not going to get away with this." Brittany scoffed, clearly unimpressed by Avery's calm demeanor. "Oh, I'm in your way? You're the one who's standing in the way of me and getting what I want, Avery. You're the one who thinks your kid's special, thinks she gets special treatment. But I'm not going to sit by while you turn this neighborhood upside down." Avery felt the muscles in their jaw tighten, the familiar fire of their former life flickering at the back of their mind. They had once ruled over a courtroom with authority, their voice commanding respect. Now, standing in front of Brittany, that power felt almost within reach again. But Avery knew better. The law wasn't on their side here. This was about principle, about drawing a line in the sand and saying enough. Avery stood taller, their hands still resting on their daughter's tiny back, offering comfort in a world where none seemed to be present. They had nothing to prove to Brittany, nothing to show her about their past life as a judge. But in this moment, Avery wasn't going to back down. Not again. The confrontation that had been building for weeks, months even, finally came to a head. Every harsh word, every judgmental glance, all of it had led them here. Brittany thought she had the upper hand, thought she could dictate the rules. But Avery had spent their whole life learning how to handle difficult people, and they weren't about to let someone like Brittany push them around. Avery took a step forward, never breaking eye contact. "You don't get to control this neighborhood. And you sure as hell don't get to control me." Brittany sneered, her eyes narrowing with a mixture of rage and disbelief. She had expected Avery to back down, to apologize for making waves. But this wasn't what she'd anticipated. She wasn't ready for the quiet strength Avery was now projecting. "Is that so?" Brittany said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I think you've forgotten who's really in charge here." Brittany's hands, still hovering dangerously close to the baby, made Avery's blood run cold. With every fiber of their being, Avery wanted to push back, to physically remove Brittany from their space. But they didn't. Instead, Avery's voice was like steel, calm yet cutting through the tension with surgical precision. "I'm not asking Brittany. I'm telling you." For a moment, there was silence. The baby's cries slowly tapered off as Avery adjusted their grip, gently rocking her in their arms. Brittany stood frozen, her anger simmering beneath the surface. But for the first time, Avery saw the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She wasn't in control. Not anymore. Brittany opened her mouth, about to say something, anything, to regain her footing, but Avery raised a hand, cutting her off. I've been in situations far worse than this, and I'm not backing down. You can either leave now, or I can call the authorities and have you removed from my property. The choice is yours. Brittany looked at Avery, her defiance slowly crumbling as the weight of the situation finally sank in. Avery wasn't just any parent, they were someone who had the tools, the knowledge, and the resolve to protect what mattered. For once, Brittany didn't say another word. She simply turned on her heel and walked away, her retreat marked by the sound of the door slamming behind her. Avery stood there for a moment, their hearts still racing, but a sense of quiet relief washing over them. It wasn't over, far from it, but this was a victory, the first of many they hoped. As they held their daughter close, Avery whispered softly, "We're safe now, baby. We're safe." Avery stood alone in the kitchen, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the only sound that filled the otherwise silent room. The aftermath of the confrontation with Brittany hung in the air like smoke, the tension still thick, even though she had left. The baby, now quiet in their arms, looked up with wide eyes, as if sensing something Avery hadn't yet fully processed. Avery's mind raced, replaying the encounter over and over. They could still see Brittany's angry face, the way her fingers had dug into their daughter's leg. It was almost as if the confrontation was playing on a loop in their head, but now that the immediate danger had passed, Avery felt a strange emptiness settle within them. The adrenaline had drained from their body, but the weight of the decision they had made, how to handle Brittany, how much to reveal of their true power, was beginning to take its toll. Did I do the right thing? The question hovered in the air, unanswered. In the moment, Avery had been sure. But now, as they stood here alone with their thoughts, doubt crept in. Their fingers traced the baby's soft hair as they stared out of the kitchen window, watching the orange glow of the fading sun. The quiet was almost unsettling, the calm before the storm. If I take control now, will I become just like her? The question echoed in their mind. Or am I letting her win by holding back? The old Avery, the judge, would have seized control of the situation with unshakable authority, drawing on years of experience, not just in the law, but in managing people. In the courtroom, Avery had been a force to be reckoned with, their voice commanding respect with every word. They had held people's fates in their hands. Guilty, innocent, it didn't matter. They made the decisions, they enforced the law. They never hesitated. But outside the courtroom, things were different. Avery had chosen to step away from that life for a reason. They had chosen peace. But now, in the face of Brittany's aggression, that same power Avery had spent years building up began to claw its way to the surface again. I could have ended this faster, could have made her see who she was really dealing with. The thought flickered like a spark in their mind, dangerous and tempting. But that's not who I am anymore. I'm not that person. Avery closed their eyes, their chest tightening as they tried to push the thoughts away. They hadn't wanted to resort to violence or intimidation. They hadn't wanted to be the person they used to be, the cold, calculating judge who could ruin someone's life with a single decision. They wanted to be better than that. They wanted to protect their daughter, but not by becoming the very thing they despised. And yet, every time Brittany's words echoed in their head, Avery felt a flash of anger, a gnawing desire to lash out. She crossed a line. She hurt my child. That's unforgivable. But was it? Was it truly unforgivable? Avery glanced down at the baby in their arms. The small face, now calm and content, was a reminder of why they had made the choice to walk away from the courtroom. They had chosen to leave that world behind for a reason, and it wasn't just to protect their family from physical harm. It was to protect them from the emotional damage that came from a life governed by constant conflict, by the need to always be right, always be in control. They had chosen peace. Yet, peace was harder to find than they had imagined. The truth was, the fight inside them never really went away. The urge to take control, to assert their dominance, was still there, just below the surface. Every time Brittany had challenged them, Avery felt the weight of that old power rising, demanding to be used. But If they gave in, if they used that power, would they be no better than Brittany? No. Avery shook their head, the thought grounding them. I'm not going to become her. I won't let her turn me into someone I'm not. The baby's small hand tugged at Avery's shirt, a gentle reminder of why they had walked away from the judge's bench in the first place. Avery's gaze softened, and they gently rocked the baby, the rhythmic motion soothing them both. You're my reason, Avery whispered softly to their child. I'll protect you no matter what. But I won't become like her. I won't let this world turn me into something I'm not. They took another deep breath, releasing the tension that had been building in their shoulders. It was going to be a long road ahead. The fight was far from over, and they knew it. But for the first time in a long time, Avery felt something stir within them, something deeper than anger. It was a calm certainty, the kind that only came when you knew exactly who you were and what you were willing to fight for. And Avery was willing to fight, but they weren't going to fight the way Brittany would. They were going to fight for peace, for control over their own life, for their daughter. They looked out the window, once more, the last rays of sunlight painting the sky. The battle's not over, Avery thought, but I'll face it with strength, with clarity, and I won't let it turn me into someone I'm not. With one last look at the fading daylight, Avery took another deep breath. The calm had returned, and with it, the resolve to protect their family at all costs. The quiet that had descended over the house after Brittany's departure was only temporary. Avery's heart was still racing, the echoes of the confrontation still ringing in their ears. But it wasn't just the heat of the moment that lingered. There was a cold, unsettling realization building within them. The battle wasn't over. Brittany had retreated for now, but Avery knew she wasn't the type to stay down for long. She would come back, and when she did, it would be worse. Avery sat in the living room, their daughter nestled in their arms, feeling the weight of their past life as a judge pressing down on them again. They had tried to leave it behind, tried to embrace a quieter, more peaceful life, but life had a way of dragging them back into the fight. And Brittany had just made it clear that she wasn't going to give Avery the luxury of peace. Not now. The doorbell rang, sharp and sudden, cutting through the silence. Avery froze, their heart leaping into their throat. It's her. She's back already. Taking a deep breath, they stood, trying to steady their nerves. This time, they were ready. This time, they wouldn't react out of anger or fear. They'd learned from the past. Now, they would face Brittany with the calm of a person who knew exactly how to handle a bully. With the steadying weight of experience, Avery walked to the door, every step purposeful. When they opened it, there she was, Brittany, standing tall with a smug expression as though she had all the answers. But Avery wasn't fooled. Behind that bravado was a woman who thought she could take whatever she wanted, who believed she could push anyone around if she played her cards right. What do you want? Avery's voice was steady, no trace of hesitation in it. Brittany may have thought she held the power, but Avery was no longer going to be intimidated. Brittany stepped forward without invitation, a flash of fury in her eyes. I'm not done with this, Avery. You may think you can control the situation, but you've crossed a line. And I don't care who you used to be, you're not going to stop me from doing what I want. Avery didn't flinch. They stood their ground, feeling the weight of their past, the cases, the decisions, the years spent in courtrooms filled with conflict. They'd had power once. They'd been the one to hold others accountable. But this was different. This wasn't about the law anymore. This was about making sure their family was safe. I'm no longer a judge, Avery said quietly, their voice cold but firm. But I still know when someone's breaking the law. Brittany scoffed, her confidence faltering. She took a step closer, her eyes narrowing. What's that supposed to mean? It means that I know exactly what you're doing, Avery replied, each word measured, controlled. You're trespassing, threatening me and my family, and I'm not going to let that slide. I'll call the police if I have to. The moment the words left Avery's mouth, Brittany's expression faltered for the first time. The smugness, the sense of control she had been holding on to, began to crack. Avery could see it in her eyes, a flicker of doubt, Just a brief moment of realization that this wasn't going the way she had planned. "You can't do that," Brittany hissed, but there was an uncertainty now, hesitation. The fight in her eyes was waning, replaced by confusion. Avery's posture shifted, no longer the tense stance of someone preparing for a fight, but the calm of someone who knew they had the upper hand. "I'm not going to play games with you, Brittany. I don't need to resort to the law to make my point. I'm telling you now, this ends. You'll stay away from me and my family, or I will make sure you regret it." Brittany took a step back, her gaze darting to the ground before snapping back up to Avery. "You're not the same person I thought you were," she muttered, the harshness of her tone now tinged with something else, fear. Avery's voice remained steady, unyielding. "That's right. I'm not. But don't mistake my calm for weakness. I know exactly what I'm doing." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The power dynamic had shifted. Avery could feel it in the way Brittany avoided their gaze, in the way her shoulders sagged. It was subtle, but it was there. Brittany wasn't in control anymore. Avery was. Without another word, Avery stepped back, opening the door wide enough for Brittany to see the quiet strength that had been their greatest weapon all along, the unwavering resolve to protect their family, no matter the cost. "I suggest you leave," Avery said, their voice cool, but final. Brittany stood frozen, her jaw clenched, the fight clearly gone out of her. She turned, muttering something under her breath, before retreating down the front steps, never looking back. As the door closed behind her, Avery let out a breath they hadn't realized they'd been holding. The silence that followed felt different now, more settled, more grounded. Avery walked back into the living room, their daughter still quietly nestled in their arms. For the first time that evening, Avery felt at peace. The power struggle wasn't over, it was only just beginning. But in that moment, Avery had made it clear they weren't going to let anyone, especially Brittany, take away their sense of control again. The evening air was cool against Avery's skin as they stood on the porch, watching the last remnants of daylight slip away behind the horizon. Their daughter had fallen asleep in their arms, her small breaths soft and steady. For a brief moment, everything was calm. Everything was safe. But Avery knew better than to think it would last. Brittany's presence was still fresh in their mind, a constant reminder that their peace was fragile at best. The creak of the porch swing, breaking the silence, snapped Avery out of their thoughts. They turned, expecting to see the wind playing with the old swing, but instead there was a shadow standing at the edge of the yard. A silhouette, familiar but distant. Avery's heart skipped a beat, the faintest flicker of unease rising within them. Before they could say anything, the figure stepped closer into the light, revealing none other than Brittany. The woman was standing there, her stance now less defiant, but still holding a certain force. Her face, typically hard with arrogance, was now blank, drained of its usual sharpness. It was almost as though something had shifted, something Avery couldn't quite place. "Brittany," Avery's voice was low, cautious. "What are you doing here?" Brittany didn't speak at first, her gaze fixed on the ground before she finally looked up, locking eyes with Avery. There was a hesitation in her movements now, an uncertainty that hadn't been there before. She didn't look like the same woman who had barged into Avery's home earlier. This Brittany seemed smaller, almost vulnerable. But the fire in her eyes was still there, buried beneath something Avery couldn't yet understand. "I need to talk to you," Brittany said, her voice lacking the usual bite. The words hung in the air, uncharacteristically devoid of the usual aggression. She took a step closer, her hands shaking just slightly at her sides. Avery's protective instincts kicked in immediately. They stepped forward, holding their daughter a little tighter, their eyes narrowing. "I don't know what you think we have to talk about. You've made it clear where you stand." Brittany's jaw tightened, but this time it wasn't out of anger. There was something else, something closer to regret. "I know," she murmured. "I know I've made a mess of things. I've done things I shouldn't have." Avery's chest tightened. This was unexpected. "What is she saying?" Brittany looked away, her eyes scanning the ground for a moment before they flicked back up to meet Avery's. "You know, when I saw you standing there earlier, calm, collected, she paused, as if measuring the weight of her own words. I thought you were just some pushover, someone who couldn't stand up for themselves, someone who had left the power behind, thinking they could just play nice. But then I saw in you that same strength I used to see in myself. Avery frowned, not fully understanding. The wind rustled the leaves of the trees around them, the tension in the air palpable. What are you talking about? Brittany's voice dropped to a whisper, barely audible over the night sounds. I saw you fight today, and I saw something else, something I wasn't expecting. Her eyes darkened slightly. I saw a judge, someone who knew exactly how to use their power, but chose not to. I don't know what made you leave all that behind, but I can tell you didn't lose it. Avery's heart thudded painfully in their chest. The words, the realization, hit them like a slap to the face. Brittany was right. Avery had chosen to leave the power behind, to walk away from the courtroom where they had held control over so many lives. But even now, in moments like these, that strength still lay beneath the surface, dormant, but never fully gone. I'm not that person anymore, Avery said, their voice low, the weight of their decision pressing down on them. I left that life for a reason. I wanted peace. I wanted something different. Brittany's lips twisted into a bitter smile. Peace? She asked, almost scoffing. You think you can just have peace? You think you can walk away from everything and pretend like it doesn't matter? Avery looked down at their daughter, her peaceful expression a stark contrast to the tension between them. I left because of her. For her. To give her a better life. The words echoed in Avery's mind, but they didn't say them aloud. Instead, they focused on the present, on what had to be done now. No, Avery replied firmly. I left because I wanted something better. Something that wasn't built on controlling others. Brittany took a step back, her eyes widening as though the weight of Avery's words had finally landed. She opened her mouth to argue, but stopped herself. Her expression faltered, and for the first time, she seemed to understand. The power dynamic had shifted once more. This time, it was clear to Brittany that Avery wasn't just a former judge, they were a parent, someone who valued love over control, protection over dominance. I'm not trying to control you, Avery, Brittany said, softer now. I was just trying to hold on to something, anything, really. I thought I could win, but now, I don't know what I'm doing anymore. Avery exhaled slowly, their heart heavy with the weight of the past and the uncertain future. Brittany had admitted something Avery hadn't expected, vulnerability. A crack in the armor. It wasn't enough to undo the damage, but it was a start. You can change, Avery said quietly but with conviction. You can walk away from all this, just like I did. But it's not about winning, Brittany. It's about being better. Brittany nodded, her eyes downcast. She said nothing more. But the silence between them felt different now, less hostile, less charged with anger. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was an acknowledgement. The past wasn't something they could erase, but it was something they could learn from. As Brittany turned and walked away, Avery watched her go, still holding their daughter, still grounded in the quiet, unshakable resolve that had brought them this far. They didn't need power to win anymore. They had something more important, control over their own life. And in that moment, they knew that was all they needed. The darkness crept in around them as the night settled, but Avery didn't mind. It was a new chapter, one they were ready to face, peacefully but with strength. The morning light poured through the windows, casting soft rays across the living room. Avery stood in the kitchen, the quiet hum of the coffee maker filling the stillness. The smell of fresh coffee was comforting, grounding, something they had long since learned to rely on. With a steady hand, they poured a cup, the steam rising into the air as they brought it to their lips. It was a routine that had once felt like an escape, but now it felt like something more, a symbol of a life rebuilt, a life Avery was finally starting to accept. Their daughter, now awake, sat in the living room playing with a set of building blocks, her tiny hands carefully stacking them one by one. Avery watched her for a moment, a soft smile tugging at the corners of their lips. There was a peace in her world, a simple, untroubled existence that Avery was determined to protect. It wasn't the world they had once known with the constant noise of courtrooms and judgment, but it was theirs, and it was enough. As Avery sipped their coffee, the doorbell rang again, pulling them from their thoughts. Their hearts skipped a beat, but this time there was no hesitation. There was no anger, no fear of what might be waiting outside. The past few days had shaken them, but they had also steeled their resolve. Whoever it was at the door, Avery was ready. They set the mug down on the counter and walked toward the door. The faintest flicker of doubt lingered in their chest, but it quickly dissipated. They had come so far from the person they had been, from the life that had held them prisoner for so long. Now they were in control. They could handle whatever came next. When they opened the door, Brittany was standing there, a hesitant expression on her face. This time, there was no arrogance, no smirk. Her eyes were tired, but there was something else there. Something Avery hadn't expected. A kind of quiet understanding. "I know I've made a mess of things," Brittany said, her voice softer than it had ever been. I didn't know what I was doing. I thought I had control, but all I've done is hurt people. You and your daughter, especially her. I'm sorry." Avery stood there for a moment, surprised. The words were an admission of guilt, but they didn't feel like an apology, not in the way Avery had expected. Brittany wasn't asking for forgiveness. She wasn't trying to undo the damage. She was simply acknowledging it. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Avery took a breath, the tension in their chest slowly releasing. "You can't change the past, Brittany. You can't take back what you did. But you can make better choices from here on out." Brittany nodded slowly, her eyes locked on the ground. She seemed smaller somehow, more vulnerable. "I know, and I'm trying. I don't want to be like this anymore. I've been running from everything for so long, and I didn't know how to stop." Avery stepped aside, holding the door open. "You don't have to do it alone. I don't know if we can ever be friends, but I can't keep you out forever. You're part of this neighborhood, too. You need to live with the consequences of your actions, but you don't need to keep fighting." There was a long silence as Brittany looked up at Avery, her expression unreadable. Slowly, she nodded again, then turned and walked away, her shoulders slumped but somehow lighter. Avery closed the door, quietly behind her, leaning against it for a moment as they exhaled. As they walked back into the living room, they could see their daughter, still playing with her blocks. Avery knelt down beside her, gently brushing a lock of hair from her face. The little one looked up, her face lighting up with a smile. As she reached up, her arms wide for a hug. Avery scooped her up, holding her close, feeling the warmth of her small body in their arms. For the first time in days, a sense of true peace washed over them. The fight wasn't over, they knew that, but they had taken the first step toward healing, toward a future that didn't revolve around control or confrontation. It wasn't the world Avery had once known, but it was a world they had chosen, and that made all the difference. And as the sun continued to rise outside, the promise of a new day filled the air. A day where Avery would continue to protect their family, where they would stand firm in their resolve, not with the power of the law, but with the strength of their love and determination. For the first time, Avery truly felt like they had won, not by defeating Brittany, but by finding a way to protect their peace. And in that, Avery knew they had everything they needed. The afternoon had slipped quietly into evening, and Avery stood by the window, looking out at the neighborhood. The world beyond their home seemed unchanged, cars driving by, people walking their dogs, children playing the streets. But inside, things were different. Avery felt the shift, a quiet resolution settling in their chest. The peace they'd fought for, the calm they had carefully cultivated, was finally theirs. Their daughter was asleep again, tucked in her crib, her breathing soft and steady. Avery had been watching her for what felt like hours, as though afraid the tranquility might slip away if they looked away for even a moment. They had been so consumed by the chaos of the past few days, the confrontation with Brittany, the turmoil within themselves, that they had forgotten how much they valued moments like this. The stillness, the simplicity. Avery turned away from the window, walking quietly across the room. The house was bathed in the soft, fading light of the evening, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Avery felt something close to serenity. They picked up the phone from the kitchen counter, staring at the screen for a moment, unsure. There was something they needed to do. They had spent so much time running away from their past, from the life they had left behind. But now they understood completely that it wasn't about leaving it behind. It was about integrating it into the person they had become. Avery dialed the number. As the phone rang, they felt a calm, almost detached certainty this was the right thing to do. The line clicked, and the voice on the other end was familiar, distant, yet still filled with authority. "Hello. Hey, it's Avery," they said, their voice steady, more confident than it had been in a long time. "I've been thinking about everything. About the cases, the decisions, the way I left everything behind." Avery paused, taking a deep breath. "I'm ready to come back. Not as a judge, but I want to help. In any way I can. There's a lot I can still offer." The silence on the other end of the line was brief, but it was enough to tell Avery that this wasn't something they'd expected to hear. But Avery wasn't asking for permission. They were simply stating a fact. The decision had been made. "I've been away long enough," Avery continued, "but I'm ready now. To get involved again. To use what I've learned in a new way. I can't walk away from what I know. Not anymore." After a moment, the voice responded, "I thought you'd say that." There was a pause, a thoughtful consideration, before the person on the other end continued. "All right, Avery, let's start figuring this out." Avery hung up the phone with a small smile tugging at the corners of their lips. It wasn't the resolution they had expected, but it was the one they had needed. They weren't walking away from their past. They were integrating it, using it as a foundation for the future. It wasn't about reclaiming control, it was about knowing when to step back, when to let go, and when to act. As they turned away from the counter, a sense of peace washed over them. It wasn't a grand, dramatic moment. It was quiet, subtle, but it felt right. They had made peace with the past, but they were ready to shape the future. Not alone, but with the wisdom they had gained and the strength of the family they had built. In the distance, the last light of day dipped below the horizon, the stars beginning to appear one by one in the clear sky. Avery stepped into the living room, their footsteps soft, the weight of the day lifting from their shoulders. They moved to the couch, sitting down with a sigh of contentment. For the first time in what felt like years, Avery felt at home. Completely. The fight for peace, for safety, for family, it wasn't over. But in that moment, Avery knew they had everything they needed to face whatever came next. They had the strength of their past, the wisdom of their choices, and the love of the family they had worked so hard to protect. The door was now open, but this time it wasn't a door to a past they needed to run from. It was a door to a future they could step into with their head held high. And for the first time, Avery knew everything was going to be all right. If you enjoyed this gripping journey of power, struggle, and redemption, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join us for more thrilling episodes on the HOA stories. Don't miss out on any of the drama, suspense, and emotional twists. Stay tuned for the next chapter. Leave your thoughts in the comments below and share this story with anyone who loves a good power struggle. Subscribe to the HOA stories now and stay engaged with every shocking twist.